Don't be fooled by the landscape of Mars. Its red dust hides not just rocks, but the scene of a silent crime, a planetary murder, executed over millions of years. No bodies or weapons were left behind, only a deafening silence, and the one clue that truly matters, the ghost of an echo. And what this echo reveals is not just the story of a lost world, but an urgent warning about the fate of our own. Prepare to embark on a journey full of surprises. Fasten your seatbelt, because we are about to dive headfirst into today's mystery. But before we begin, here's a little secret. They say that those who leave a like and subscribe to the channel before the end of the video unlock a wave of unbelievable luck. Don't miss this chance. The best is yet to come. If an entire planet can die, does its silence leave a ghost behind? This is not a question for science fiction. It is the question that haunts every image we receive from Mars. That red dot in our night sky is not just a desert of rocks and dust, but the scene of a crime on a cosmic scale, a mystery of planetary murder whose investigation is just beginning. The clues are not in DNA or fingerprints, but in the deep and unnatural silence of a world that, today, only echoes the void. We are looking at a tomb, and the absent body is an entire biosphere, a life we may never know. The shocking truth is that the desolate beauty of Mars is a mask. Beneath the majestic canyons and sweeping plains lies the anatomy of a corpse. The fine red dust, composed of iron oxide, is like the dried blood of a world that once pulsed with energy. Scientists speak of geology and atmosphere, but the language Mars truly speaks is that of loss. Every crater is a scar, every dry riverbed a hardened vein, and the silence that hangs over it all is irrefutable proof that the heart of this world, at some unimaginable point in the past, stopped beating forever. Imagine the loneliness of being in that place. Our rovers, the most solitary explorers in human history, crawl across the surface, and the only sounds their microphones pick up are their own mechanical creaks and the crunch of their wheels on the ground. It is a profane sound, an intrusion of metal and electricity into a silence made sacred by its antiquity. Any sound we make on Mars sounds like a scream in a cathedral, a noisy reminder of our living presence in a place defined by absence. The stillness is so complete that it becomes a physical presence, a force pressing in from all sides. Even the wind, the only thing that still moves freely there, tells a story of desolation. It is not the sound of a breeze rustling through trees or announcing rain. The Martian wind is the phantom breath of a dying atmosphere, a thin, icy gust that carries grains of dust to nowhere. It passes through the canyons, not with a howl, but with a hollow whisper, the sound of forgetting. It is the voice of a planet with nothing left to say, an indifferent caretaker who merely rearranges the dust on the tombstones of an infinite cemetery. The landscape itself seems to have been sculpted by the question, what happened here? The geological formations are not just rocks, they are monuments to catastrophe. Valles Marineris, a canyon system that would make the Grand Canyon look like a scratch, is not a testament to the grandeur of nature, but to the violence of a planetary crust that broke apart. The polar ice caps, with their layers of ice and dust, are like the rings of a dead tree, recording eons of a climate that unraveled into an endless winter, a frozen chronicle of the apocalypse. Our obsession with finding life on Mars perhaps says more about us than it does about the red planet. We seek a reflection, a confirmation that we are not alone in our fragility. Every time a rock looks like a bone or a shadow creates the illusion of a figure, a part of us yearns for it to be true. It is the phenomenon of pareidolia on a cosmic scale, our minds trying to fill the terrifying void with something familiar, searching for a known face in the vastness to feel a little less lost, a little less vulnerable to the same extinction. From the soil of Mars, Earth is not a vibrant blue world. It is just a night star, a bright and lonely point of light, indistinguishable from thousands of others. Imagine the perspective. To be on a demonstrably dead world, looking at a pale point of light that you know is teeming with life, with noise, with chaos and color. This view transforms loneliness from a feeling into a fundamental fact of the universe. The distance between life and death is not an abyss, but a simple glance across the vacuum of space. Time on Mars operates on a scale that defies human imagination. Our concept of history, with its centuries and millennia, is the blink of an eye to a world whose main story ended billions of years ago. What we see today is a planet in stasis, trapped in a moment of silence that has stretched on for longer than complex life itself has existed on Earth. The weight of this empty time is crushing. We are not just exploring a place, we are exploring an era of inertia, an ocean of time where absolutely nothing has happened. This leads us to redefine what it means to explore. We are not on Mars to conquer or colonize in the traditional sense. We are like archaeologists entering a pyramid that was sealed for ages, where the prize is not gold, but understanding. Every gram of soil analyzed, every atmospheric reading taken, is an attempt to translate the language of planetary death. We are trying to learn to read the ashes in the hope of understanding the fire that caused them and perhaps preventing a similar fire in our own home. The absence of sound on Mars is so profound that it affects the very physics of existence. With an atmosphere 100 times thinner than Earth's, sound waves simply have no medium to travel through. A scream would become a murmur just a few meters away. An explosion would be a muffled thud. This scientific fact is the physical basis for the poem of its desolation. Mars is not quiet by choice. It is quiet because its ability to produce and carry sound was torn from it, along with its air, its water, and its life. Some theorists suggest that this relentless search is, in fact, a form of collective mourning. We are mourning a life we never knew, lamenting the loss of a sibling planet that could have been a second Eden and instead became a memorial. This sense of loss is what drives the narrative, what makes us return to the same question over and over. It is not just scientific curiosity, it is an emotional need to understand why a world so similar to our own had a fate so tragically different. The red dust, omnipresent, is the silent protagonist of this story. It covers everything with a shroud of rust, a veil that both hides the past and preserves it. Beneath this layer, the planet is almost perfectly mummified, protected from the erosion that erases history on Earth. Mars is, paradoxically, the place where the past is best preserved, frozen at the exact moment of its death. The dust is the seal of the tomb, and our rovers are the first tools attempting carefully to break it after 1 billion years. The mystery deepens when we realize we are not looking for dinosaurs or advanced civilizations. We are looking for the smallest, faintest sign, an organic molecule, an out-of-place isotope, a fossilized biosignature of a bacterium. The scale of our search is microscopic, which makes the silence all the more deafening. An entire planet may have lived and died, and the only evidence left could be an invisible chemical trace, a molecular whisper almost impossible to distinguish from the background noise of the universe. Therefore, the initial question unfolds into 1,000 others. Was the death of Mars a sudden and violent event, or a slow, agonizing decline? Was it a natural and inevitable process, or a cosmic accident that could have been avoided? Is there a great filter in the universe that prevents life from becoming long-lasting? Each question moves us away from geology and closer to philosophy, transforming space exploration into a profound journey about our own place and purpose in the cosmos, an exercise in humility before the fragility of existence. All this weight of silence and time is merely the current state of affairs, the final chapter in a much longer and more vibrant story. This deafening silence that defines the planet today is only so impactful because it replaced something. To truly understand the magnitude of what was lost, we need to rewind time to travel to an era when the stillness had not yet won. We need to force ourselves to listen to what came before the end, the fragile, almost forgotten sound of a world that should have never died. For a moment, forget the red planet that haunts our imagination. Let's adjust the lens of time and travel 4 billion years into the past, to an era when Mars was not a silence, but a song. Back then, it was not a desert, but an oasis, a sibling world to our own Earth, wrapped in a promising atmosphere and painted not with rust, but with a deep, vibrant blue. This is not the Mars we know. It is the Mars that was lost, a world of infinite potential whose phantom memory is the real reason we keep going back, searching for the echoes of a forgotten paradise. Imagine a sky that is not pink and thin, but a dense, pale blue, perhaps with a buttery hue near the horizon, where a younger, more distant sun shone with a softer light. Clouds of water vapor, white and delicate, drifted lazily, casting fleeting shadows across the landscape. The atmospheric pressure was sufficient that you could feel the air on your skin, a protective embrace that held in the warmth and allowed the miracle of liquid water. It was a sky that promised rain, that promised life, the ceiling of a planetary greenhouse that nurtured a world in its infancy. The pulsating heart of this world was a vast ocean that covered most of the northern hemisphere. Visualize its shores, not with white sand and palm trees, but with the dark volcanic rocks of a young planet, polished by the incessant movement of the tides. The sound of breaking waves, a constant and powerful rhythm, echoed across dark beaches, a sound no human has ever heard, but which today reverberates in our curiosity. This ocean was the cradle of all possibilities, a cauldron of complex chemistry where the ingredients of life could meet and dance. From this great ocean, rivers snaked inland across continents like arteries carrying the essence of life. Today we see their scars, the dry beds and fossilized deltas, as in Jezero Crater, where the Perseverance rover now searches for signs. But back then, they were living dynamic river systems, carving valleys, depositing layers of mineral-rich sediment, and nourishing the land. Water was not an anomaly. It was the dominant force, the primary sculptor of the Martian surface, the engine of an active and complex hydrological system that rivaled that of the young Earth. This world had weather. It had seasons. There were dramatic storms that swept across the plains, with rains that washed the volcanic dust and fed the rivers. Imagine the smell of Martian rain falling on dry soil, an alien petrichor, the fragrance of a living world. Snow accumulated on the peaks of the highest mountains, and the polar ice caps, much larger than today, advanced and retreated with the seasons. It was a functional climate system, a perpetual cycle of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation that sustained the constant presence of liquid water on the surface. The color palette of this young Mars was rich and diverse, far beyond the monotonous red of today. There was the deep blue of the oceans, the dark gray of basaltic rocks, the dazzling white of clouds and polar ice. On the shores of lakes and hydrothermal vents, mineral deposits could have painted the landscape with shades of green, yellow, and orange. And in the shallow sunlit waters, if life had begun, perhaps the first colonies of microbes would have formed mats with their own colors, the first brushstrokes of biology on a planetary canvas. This vision is not a mere poetic fancy. It is built on a foundation of solid scientific evidence. Our rovers and orbiters have acted as geological detectives, discovering minerals like gypsum, jarosite, and the famous hematite blueberries, mineral spheres that on Earth form almost exclusively in water. Every layer of sediment analyzed, every vein of mineral identified, is a confirmation, a piece of the puzzle that allows us to confidently reconstruct the image of this ancient watery world. Science has given us permission to dream of this blue Mars. In that primordial era, Earth and Mars were sibling planets, almost twins. Both were rocky, volcanic, and wet worlds, orbiting a young and tempestuous sun. Both possessed the same basic ingredients for life: liquid water, an energy source, and the organic compounds delivered by comets and asteroids. If life could arise on Earth under these conditions, it is almost a logical certainty that it had, at the very least, a chance to begin on Mars. For a time, the solar system may have harbored not one but two oases of potential life. Speculating about this first Martian life is an exercise in controlled imagination. We are not talking about civilizations, but about the first and humblest beginning. Imagine shallow, warm pools, heated by subterranean geothermal vents. In these protected environments, complex molecules could have formed, giving rise to the first replicators, the first cells. Perhaps they formed microbial mats similar to the stromatolites we find in the oldest fossils on Earth, the first structures built by life, breathing slowly in an alien atmosphere. The sound of this world would have been a geological symphony. In contrast to the near-absolute silence of today, young Mars was noisy. There was the constant roar of active volcanoes spewing gases that helped build the atmosphere. There was the bubbling of hot springs, the thunder of lightning amidst ash clouds, the hiss of rain falling on hot rocks, and the constant flow of thousands of rivers and streams. It was the cacophony of a geologically alive planet, the soundtrack of a world in formation, a hymn to its own vitality. The great secret behind this paradise was invisible, a spinning, liquid iron core. Just as on Earth, this internal dynamo generated a powerful global magnetic field, a magnetosphere. This was the most crucial piece of the habitability puzzle. The magnetosphere acted as an invisible force shield, a protective cocoon that enveloped the planet, deflecting the constant stream of deadly particles and radiation that gushed from the young sun, the so-called solar wind. It was this shield that allowed the atmosphere and oceans to exist in peace. This was a world at the peak of its promise, a planet with a future that seemed limitless. It possessed all the prerequisites to follow in Earth's footsteps, to evolve from a primordial soup into a complex and diverse biosphere. The stability provided by its magnetic shield and dense atmosphere gave life, had it arisen, the most precious commodity of all: time. Time to adapt, time to evolve, time to take hold, and perhaps one day to look up at the stars and wonder if it was alone. Viewed from space, this ancestral Mars would have been a jewel, a blue and white marble with ochre and gray patches from its volcanic continents. It would have been a beacon of hope, a second point of genesis in our solar system, proving that the recipe for life was not an exclusive fluke of Earth. The existence of two habitable worlds side by side would have fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The image of this lost blue planet is perhaps the most tragic vision in the entire history of our planetary system. Today, all that remains of this vibrant world are fossils on a continental scale. The coastlines of ancient oceans are still visible in topographical data, like the tide marks of an emptied bathtub. The winding channels of rivers are like the skeletons of giant serpents lying in the desert. Every discovery of a hydrated mineral is like finding a bone fragment of an extinct creature. We are essentially conducting the paleontology of an ocean, the archaeology of an atmosphere, sifting through the wreckage of a planetary shipwreck. This blue paradise, protected and full of potential, was the personification of stability. But stability in the cosmos is a fleeting illusion. In the depths of the planet, where the great engine of the magnetic field spun, something began to change. The heart of Mars was cooling. Slowly and imperceptibly, the dynamo began to slow down, and its invisible shield, the guardian of life, began to flicker and fail. The greatest storm in the history of the solar system was brewing, and the entire planet was in its path, completely defenseless. Every paradise carries the seed of its own destruction. For a young Mars, that seed was not an external force, but a flaw born in its iron heart. The great planetary engine in its core, the liquid metal dynamo that spun furiously to generate the planet's protective shield, began to lose its momentum. Slowly and silently, over countless millennia, the heart of Mars began to cool. This was not an explosive event, but a gradual weakening, a cardiac arrest in slow motion happening in the depths, completely unnoticed by the vibrant surface that depended on it for survival. This shield, the magnetosphere, was the planet's invisible masterpiece. Imagine it as an iridescent energy bubble, a cosmic cocoon that enveloped the world. For eons, it bravely deflected solar storms, the gusts of charged particles that the sun emitted like a weapon. It was a constant, violent dance, with the shield bending and glowing, protecting the fragile blue atmosphere that enveloped the planet. But as its nuclear engine weakened, the shield began to flicker. Flaws began to appear, tears in its invisible armor, the first evidence of the scar that would doom the world. To understand the battle, we must understand the aggressor. The sun, which was once the source of energy and heat, revealed its other face, that of a relentless predator. What we call the solar wind is not a breeze, but a supersonic flow of plasma, a sandblast of subatomic particles traveling at more than 1,000,000 kilometers per hour. During Mars's youth, the shield withstood this continuous assault. But when the armor began to fail, the predator smelled blood in the water. The greatest hunt in the history of the solar system was about to begin, and its target was the soul of a planet. The first breach was a silent, catastrophic event. A particularly violent pulse from the sun found a weakness in the oscillating shield and tore through it. Tsunamis of radiation and high-energy particles, previously deflected, now plunged deep into Mars's upper atmosphere for the first time. On the surface, nothing seemed different. The sky was still blue, the rivers still flowed. But at the top of the world, an invisible invasion had begun, and the atmosphere, the very breath of the planet, began to be stripped away, molecule by molecule, in a theft that would last for millions of years. This process, known as sputtering or atmospheric escape, was the official cause of death. Imagine solar wind particles as microscopic cannonballs, each one colliding with a single air molecule, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and precious water vapor. Each collision was powerful enough to eject that molecule from the atmosphere, launching it into space, never to return. It was a hemorrhage in slow motion, a bleeding of air into the vacuum drop by drop, molecule by molecule, until almost nothing was left. On the surface, the consequences began to manifest subtly. The sky, once a pale blue, began to grow thinner, more watery, losing its rich color as the air density decreased. The atmospheric pressure, the force that held the world together, began to drop inexorably. With less atmosphere to trap heat, the nights became brutally colder. The mild, stable climate gave way to violent temperature swings. The planet was losing its blanket, becoming naked, and exposed to the harshness of space. Then, one of the most bizarre and terrible phenomena began to occur. With the drastic drop in air pressure, the boiling point of water plummeted. The surfaces of the vast oceans, lakes, and rivers began to boil. It was not a boil caused by heat, but a cold boil, caused by the absence of pressure, like how water boils in the vacuum of space. The planet began to release its oceans in the form of enormous clouds of vapor, which rose into the upper atmosphere, where they were easy prey for the thieving solar wind. What was not stripped away by boiling faced an opposite, but equally fatal, destiny. The thin atmosphere could no longer sustain a significant greenhouse effect. The heat of the day radiated back into space almost instantly at nightfall. Global temperatures plummeted. A deep and permanent chill set in, ushering in a final ice age from which Mars would never recover. The rivers froze in their course, the ocean shores receded as water turned to ice, and the blue landscape began to be covered by a glacial white. As the atmosphere disappeared, another invisible enemy finally reached the surface: radiation. The sun's ultraviolet rays and high-energy cosmic rays, which had once been blocked, now bombarded the ground and water with full force. This radiation is a natural sterilizer capable of destroying complex organic molecules and shredding DNA. Any life that might have existed on the surface or in shallow waters would have been subjected to a relentless assault, burned by an invisible cosmic flame that made the very soil toxic. The planet lost its balance. The climate, once a system of predictable cycles, became a chaos of extremes. Zones that were once temperate now alternated between boiling under the midday sun and freezing deep at night. Dust storms, fueled by the increasingly unimpeded winds, began to become more frequent and global, enveloping the planet in veils of dust for months at a time. The gentle, stable world was dead. In its place, a monster of instability and climatic violence was born. There was a point of no return, a moment when the loss became an irreversible cascade. With less atmosphere, the planet grew colder, which froze more carbon dioxide at the polar caps, which in turn thinned the atmosphere even further. It was a vicious cycle, a planetary death spiral. From that point on, there was no more hope. The immune system of Mars had completely collapsed, and the terminal illness, which began in its core, now consumed the entire body of the planet without mercy. The final result of this process is the landscape we see today: a frozen and irradiated desert with an atmosphere so thin it is practically a vacuum. The water that survived is locked away as permafrost beneath the soil or in polar ice caps. The invisible scar of the dead magnetosphere is the true mortal wound. The planet did not just change its appearance, it lost its soul, its fundamental ability to harbor and sustain the complexity and wonder of life on its surface. The great cosmic irony in the death of Mars is that its destruction did not come from a spectacular collision with an asteroid or the explosion of a nearby star. It was a silent, internal, and in a way, natural death. The planet was simply not large enough to retain its internal heat for a sufficient time. Its heart cooled and died, and the rest of the body followed suit. It is a terrifying lesson that suggests that worlds, much like living beings, can have a finite lifespan, an inherent vulnerability that comes from within. This internal failure, however, makes the tragedy even deeper. It was not an accident, it was destiny inscribed in its mass and its geology. The planet contained within itself the clock of its own death. And as we watch this process with the detachment of science, it is impossible not to wonder about the drama that unfolded on the surface. The physics that describes the loss of an atmosphere is blind and indifferent, but life, on the other hand, feels pain, fear, and loss. This was the murder of the planet, a process of time and physics that stripped it of its blue glory. But physics has no consciousness, it does not mourn what was lost. Life does. And as the sky of Mars faded, its oceans boiled, and the mortal cold set in, one question becomes inevitable and frightening. Was anyone there to witness this apocalypse? Did someone look up at the thinning sky and see their world, their home, being stolen right before their eyes? The most brutally honest answer is that we do not know if anyone was there to witness the end. Science has not yet found any conclusive evidence. But the human imagination, that tireless tool of empathy, refuses to accept such a grand stage for a play with no actors. If life truly flourished in that blue world, it would not have surrendered passively. And it is right here that the story of Mars transcends geology and astronomy, transforming into a ghost opera, a tragedy about the courage, fear, and struggle of the last inhabitants of a dying planet. The first clues of the end would not have been dramatic. They would have been subtle, small errors in the symphony of the world that only the most attentive would notice. The air, with each generation, seeming a little thinner, requiring a greater effort to breathe. The sky slowly losing its deep blue hue, becoming pale and sickly. The water, the source of all life, behaving erratically, and the plants perhaps struggling more to grow. It would be a growing anxiety, a collective and disturbing feeling that the world itself, the ground beneath their feet, was fundamentally broken. Imagine the psychological impact of this revelation, the most basic trust of any living being, that its environment is stable, being destroyed. First would come denial, the attempts to find simple explanations. Then, as the changes became undeniable, fear would give way to panic. Imagine desperate scientists presenting data to incredulous leaders, apocalyptic prophets claiming the gods had abandoned the planet, and ordinary citizens looking at the sky with a new and terrible sense of dread. The social order of any civilization would be tested to its absolute limit. Water would become the new gold, the deity and the demon. As the great northern oceans receded and the rivers dwindled to trickles of mud, survival would be reduced to a frantic search for the last wet resource. Entire populations would have migrated towards the poles, to the deepest valleys, anywhere that promised a little more time. It is easy to imagine that violent conflicts would have erupted over the control of the last lakes or aquifers, a final desperate war fought not for territory or power, but for the right to drink and survive for one more day. When solar radiation began to punish the surface, the only logical strategy would have been a mass retreat underground. The surface, once a home, became a death zone. They would have sought refuge in vast cave systems or in the lava tubes left by the planet's volcanic youth, transforming these natural structures into subterranean cities. The sunlight, once a friend, became a mortal enemy. Entire generations could have been born, lived and died in darkness without ever feeling the direct warmth of their star. Think of the profound cultural loss this would represent. To lose the sky is to lose astronomy, navigation, the poetry of the stars, the very notion of a larger universe. The children born underground would hear stories of an upper world, a legendary place of light, clouds, and open space. But to them, it would be no different from a fairy tale. The cosmos would become a myth. Reality would be the rock, the darkness, and the artificial light of their declining civilization, a universe reduced to the confines of their cave. But life is stubborn. They would have fought to adapt. Perhaps they developed brilliant technologies for recycling air and water, creating fragile, closed ecosystems in the depths of the earth. Or perhaps evolution itself kicked in, favoring individuals better adapted to low oxygen levels or with greater resistance to radiation. It would have been the final race of biology against physics, a heroic attempt to change themselves when they could no longer change their planet. The elders, the guardians of memory, would have the sacred and painful task of telling the new generations what the world above was like. They would describe the feeling of rain on the skin, the sound of ocean waves, the blue color of the sky, the shape of the clouds. These descriptions would become the founding myths of their subterranean culture, the only connection to a planetary heritage that was becoming as distant as a star. Maintaining the memory of the blue world would be their last act of resistance against oblivion. Despite all resilience, entropy is relentless. No closed system is perfect. The recycled air would slowly degrade. The water would become increasingly scarce. The energy sources, perhaps geothermal, would begin to fail. We can imagine the slow decay of these underground cities. Corridors, once bustling, becoming silent. Entire districts being sealed off to conserve resources. The lights flickering and, one by one, going out forever, as silence and darkness reclaimed the last refuges of life. It is almost unbearable to contemplate the experience of the last generation. to be born into a world that is a tomb with the absolute knowledge that there will be no future. To know that your death will not just be the end of a life, but the end of a species, a culture, a history of millions of years. What kind of art, music, or philosophy arises from such a desolate certainty? Perhaps a peaceful acceptance, or perhaps a final rage against the indifference of the cosmos. The weight of being the end point of everything is a burden our minds can barely conceive. In their final days, would they have tried to leave a mark? A last cry of, "We were here?" It is a hope that fuels many of our own dreams of exploration. Perhaps they built a final monument, protected in the depths, with the hope that it would withstand time. Or perhaps they used their last remnants of energy to send a single, powerful radio message into space, an SOS or an epitaph, launched in a cosmic bottle, in the hope that a future civilization might one day find it. The end of a world ultimately comes down to the end of an individual. Imagine the last Martian, the last sentient being on a once vibrant planet, alone in a dark and silent subterranean city, perhaps looking at a monitor showing the barren red landscape above. With their last breath, not just a life would end, but an entire biosphere. The consciousness of a planet, forged over eons, would be extinguished, and the silence would finally become absolute and complete. The ghosts they left behind are not ethereal apparitions that wander the plains. The real ghost is the lost possibility. It is the library of knowledge that burned forever, the art that will never be seen, the music that will never be heard. The planet is haunted by absence, by the annihilated potential. Every dry valley and every empty crater is a monument to this absence. They are the proof that something profound and significant happened here, even if all that remains is the empty space they used to fill. This story, however speculative, is a dark mirror. By forcing ourselves to imagine their struggle, we are compelled to face our own fragility. The threats of climate change, resource depletion, and conflict on our own planet cease to be political abstractions and become echoes of the Martian tragedy. The story of the last Martians is not about them. It is an existential fable, a cautionary tale whispered across space, imploring us to value the home we have and not to become the ghosts of our own blue world. And so the great and silent opera of Mars reaches its tragic end. But if this civilization truly fought, loved, built, and perished, it would not have left just a story for our imagination. It would have left physical traces, scars on the ground, broken artifacts, chemical signatures of its technology. And that is why today, our response to this great mystery is not to send poets, but machines. We send robotic geologists and solitary archaeologists whose only and sacred mission is to sift through the ashes of this world and search for these ghosts. The hunt for the ghosts of Mars does not begin with fleets of ships or manned excavations, but with the slow, deliberate, and almost reverent movement of solitary machines. Our rovers, from spirit and opportunity to curiosity and perseverance, are the silent protagonists of this new era. They are not mere robots of metal and wire. They are avatars of our curiosity, the tips of our fingers, millions of kilometers away. They are the most solitary archaeologists in history, tasked with a mission of mythical proportions to find the signature of a lost biosphere in a cemetery the size of a planet. Each mission begins with a violent and precise act of birth, the famous 7 minutes of terror. Imagine the scene: an incandescent capsule tearing through the thin Martian atmosphere, a supersonic parachute deploying, and finally a jet-powered sky crane hovering and gently lowering its precious archaeologists to the ground. This is not just a technical landing. It is the arrival of an emissary, a paratrooper descending into an unknown continent, an artificial being born on the very world it came to investigate, whose first act is to listen to the profound silence that surrounds it. The first moments of a rover on the surface of Mars are a meditation on loneliness. Imagine the machine waking up, its cameras opening for the first time to behold a landscape no human eye has ever seen directly. An infinite horizon of rocks and dust under a pink, ghostly sky. The absolute silence, broken only by the hum of its own internal systems. This mechanical loneliness is a direct reflection of our own cosmic loneliness, and the first image it sends back to Earth is more than data. It is a self-portrait of humanity staring into the void. The daily work of a solitary archaeologist is a ballet of patience. They move with a deliberate slowness, covering in a day what a human could walk in minutes. But this slowness is not a limitation. It is a methodology. Every movement is meticulously planned by a team a world away. They are not simply driving, they are reading the terrain, interpreting the layers of rock, looking for subtle clues, treating the Martian soil not as an obstacle, but as the fragile pages of an ancient manuscript that cannot be damaged. The tools they carry are not shovels and brushes, but a suite of superhuman senses. The laser of the ChemCam instrument fires at rocks, vaporizing a small portion of them to read their chemical composition, an act that is equivalent to asking a rock directly, "What story have you witnessed?" The drill on its robotic arm is not a construction tool, but a surgical scalpel performing a biopsy on the planet to extract a testimony from its interior, searching for tissues and memories of a past in which it was alive. They search for something we call biosignatures, a clinical term for the most poetic evidence of all. They do not expect to find bones or city ruins. The search is much more subtle. They look for patterns of complex organic molecules that life tends to create, for imbalances in isotopes that can only be explained by biological processes. It is the archaeological equivalent of ignoring the pyramid and instead searching for a single fossilized grain of pollen that proves flowers once grew nearby. In a way, these rovers are the only time machines we have ever built. The history of Mars is written in its layers of rock, with the oldest at the bottom and the most recent on the surface. By drilling into a rock, they are literally digging through time, accessing environments that existed 3 or 4 billion years ago. Each sample of rock dust analyzed in their internal labs is a reading of a paragraph from a lost chapter of the solar system's history, a message from an almost inconceivably distant past. The story of the twin rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, has become a legend in itself. Designed for a 90-day mission, they persevered for years. Opportunity, in particular, became the greatest explorer of all time, traveling more than 45 kilometers over 14 years. Its journey across plains and craters was not just a geological traverse, it was an epic pilgrimage, a testament to mechanical endurance that seemed to have a personality of its own, an almost lifelike stubbornness that refused to succumb to the hostile environment that surrounded it. The death of a rover is a strangely emotional event. When a global dust storm in 2018 finally silenced Opportunity, its last words, sent to NASA, were, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." To the team that had guided it for over a decade, and to the world that watched, it did not sound like a status report. It sounded like the farewell of an old explorer at the end of his journey. The planet which it had studied for so long finally reclaimed it, covering it with the same dust it had spent its life analyzing. The new generation of archaeologists is even more sophisticated. Curiosity, which landed in 2012, is a complete chemistry lab on wheels, a detective that has conclusively proven that Mars once had the right conditions for life in its distant past. And Perseverance, its successor, is the first true fossil hunter. Its primary mission is not just to analyze, but to collect and store the most promising samples, preparing them for a future, audacious mission that will bring them back to Earth to be studied in our labs. The act of collecting these samples is one of the most important feats in space exploration. Imagine the precision required. The robotic arm of Perseverance drills the rock, extracts a core the size of a piece of chalk, photographs it, and seals it hermetically in a titanium tube. Each of these tubes, left on the surface of Mars for a future pickup, is a time capsule of the highest order. A single one of these tubes may one day hold the definitive proof of extraterrestrial life, rewriting all our books on biology, religion, and philosophy. However, as solitary as the machine may be, it is the extension of a vast collective mind on Earth. Hundreds of scientists and engineers dedicate their careers to these missions. They live on Mars time, which is about 40 minutes longer than our own, adapting their sleep cycles and family lives to guide every move of their robotic representative. They are the brains behind the metal eyes, the human heart that beats behind the titanium shell, sharing every discovery, every challenge, and every moment of loneliness. The weight of expectation on every command is immense. A wrong navigational decision could trap the rover in a sand dune forever, ending a multi-billion-dollar mission. A poorly chosen rock for analysis could be a wasted opportunity. Every day of operation is a priceless resource loaded with the hope of making the greatest discovery in human history. It is like an archaeological dig where every move of the shovel could reveal either absolute nothingness or the deepest treasure in the universe. So far, our archaeologists have found overwhelming circumstantial evidence. They have not found the ghosts, but they have found the haunted house. They have discovered ancient lake beds with water that was drinkable. They have found complex organic molecules, the building blocks of life preserved in billion-year-old rocks. They have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Mars was once habitable. They have found the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the motive. The only thing still missing from the case is the victim's body. And so, our metal scouts continue their patient, methodical work, sifting through the sands of time in search of a definitive answer. But as they tirelessly search for signs of life on a distant world, their journey has an unexpected effect. It forces us to turn the camera back on ourselves. Every image of desolation sent back, every grain of dust analyzed, is not just a piece of data about Mars. It is a reflection in a cosmic mirror, and what this mirror shows us about our own fragility and our place in the universe may be the most profound lesson of this entire saga. The red dust of Mars, analyzed atom by atom by our robotic emissaries, tells a story that goes far beyond planetary geology. It whispers a silent warning, a cosmic reminder of the fragility of life and the rarity of habitable worlds. The search for the echoes of a lost civilization or an extinct life on Mars is not just a scientific expedition. It is a profound introspective journey, a look into a distant mirror that reflects our own present and foretells a possible future. The great silence of Mars is not the sound of an absolute void, but the resonance of an urgent question that echoes through time and space directly to our blue planet. If Mars, a world once so promising and similar to Earth in its youth, could succumb to such a slow and inexorable death, what guarantee do we have that our own cosmic oasis is immune to a similar fate? The story of Mars is not an anomaly. It represents one of the possible trajectories for any rocky planet in its star's habitable zone. The same forces of nature that shaped Mars, the weakening of its core, the loss of its atmosphere, are fundamental geological processes that can, on cosmic timescales, affect any world, including our own. The study of Mars offers us a unique opportunity to learn from another planet's mistakes, to observe a natural experiment in habitability that went terribly wrong. By deciphering the mechanisms that led to its sterilization, we can gain crucial insights into the factors that sustain life on Earth and, more importantly, identify the warning signs of a possible decline. The planetary paleontology of Mars may well be the key to the preventive medicine of our own planet. allowing us to take measures to protect the delicate balance that makes Earth a home. The search for life on Mars, even if we only find traces of extinct microbes, would have a profound impact on our understanding of the universe. It would prove that life is not a unique, isolated event exclusive to Earth, but rather a fundamental cosmic phenomenon, something that can arise whenever the conditions are right. This revelation would forever change our perspective on our cosmic loneliness and open up unimaginable possibilities for the existence of life in other star systems, transforming the search for extraterrestrial intelligence into an expectation and not just a dream. But perhaps the most immediate and poignant lesson from Mars is that of finitude. Worlds are born, they evolve, and eventually they can die. Civilizations can arise and disappear, leaving behind only whispers in the cosmic dust. The story of Mars confronts us with our own mortality as a species and with the potential impermanence of everything we have built. This recognition, far from being a reason for despair, can be a powerful catalyst for action, inspiring us to value the present, to protect our home, and to ensure a future for the next generations. As we contemplate the desolate images of dry canyons and windswept plains, it is impossible not to feel a touch of melancholy, a longing for a world we never knew in its glory. This sense of cosmic loss connects us in a profound way with the universe, reminding us that we are part of a vast and ever-changing cosmic tapestry, where planetary births and deaths are events as natural as the cycle of seasons on Earth. Mars, in its silent death, paradoxically teaches us about the inestimable value of life. The search for answers on Mars is a cosmic marathon, a project that spans decades and will involve countless missions and generations of scientists. The precious samples that Perseverance is collecting await their return to Earth, where they will be analyzed with technologies that have not even been invented yet. The mystery of Mars will not be solved overnight, but the search itself, this tireless thirst for knowledge, is one of the noblest expressions of the human spirit, a testament to our insatiable curiosity and our determination to understand our place in the cosmos. So the next time you look up at the night sky and spot that reddish point, remember that you are not just seeing a distant planet. You are contemplating a world that was once blue, a stage for a cosmic story of birth, life, and loss. And more importantly, remember that the story of Mars is not over. It continues to be written by the wheels of our solitary rovers, by the lenses of our vigilant orbiters, and ultimately by the curious minds of us all. The great silence of Mars is therefore a summons, a call for us to listen carefully to the whispers of its past, to learn from its tragedy, and to act as the guardians of our own blue world. The answer to the mysteries of Mars lies not only in its rocks and its atmosphere, but in the way this search transforms us, making us more aware of the preciousness of life and the urgency of protecting the only home we know. The story of Mars is, in the end, our story. And now, the journey continues. If you are fascinated by these cosmic mysteries and want to closely follow the future discoveries our robotic explorers will make on Mars, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll be one of the first to know when new evidence is revealed, when the ghosts of Mars finally begin to tell their stories. Share this video with your friends and leave your own theories about what happened to the blue world in the comments. Together, we can unlock the secrets of Mars's past and, who knows, learn crucial lessons for the future of humanity here on Earth.